Dave in advance for stepping in to Chris's very large shoes and enabling us to have all of the technology. Oh, good. I'm glad you've approached it like that. Good memories. Okay. You ready?
Before you start, I'll just get the share screen up.
That's right. Did you want to turn on your mic?
Am I talking now?
No, but you shouldn't. You might want to at some point.
Can you just check with the Zoom people they can see the PowerPoint here?
Okay, can the people on Zoom see the PowerPoint? Good?
Yep.
Okay, excellent.
Can you get rid of them?
Okay, we're minimizing you, so if you have something goes wrong and you can't see the screen or you can't hear us, please turn off your mute and let us know so that we can fix it.
I can see them on here as well.
Okay, do you want to do a click? And I think my name might appear on there and then we might move on to the next screen. No, it doesn't matter. Two, but it doesn't matter. Okay, now we're going. Oh, there we go. My name's now on the screen. Okay, so I thought I'd better start with where is the Cape to Cape track for the people that haven't been there. It's 132 kilometres long. You'll see various reports about the length from about 125 upwards, and it depends on whether you measure it from the information display at the start of the track, which isn't at the start of the track, to the one at the end, which isn't at the end, or from lighthouse to lighthouse. We walked from lighthouse to lighthouse. So we don't have a pointer, but you'll see on this one, Bunbury up there. So Perth is north of that. So this is the southwest, part of the southwest of Western Australia, and you've got the orange Cape to Cape track. This second map shows in more detail the yellow going down. It largely follows the coastline. There's a zag in where we go into forest. And although it seems to have lots of little towns it goes through, they are very small or non-existent. The ones with the triangle, such as Moses Rock, Ellens Brook and Conto and Deep Dean, are actually campsites for people that are doing end-to-end, and there's no vehicle access to those. So you can only get in by walking to them. We stayed in Margaret River. So we flew into Busselton, which is off the map on the top, and went down to and stayed in Margaret River and then travelled each day to the section of the track that we're walking, walked the section, got picked up by the bus and taken back to Margaret River. So now you know what we're going to be talking about. Yes?
You go up and then you go back.
Yes. So yes. So we went up to the top to Cape Naturalist, right at the top of that second map, and went all the way down to Cape Lewin at the very bottom.
But you said you went back to Margaret River.
So the first day we walked as far as Yellingup. And then we went back to Margaret River for the night.
It was about an hour to get to Cape Naturalist from Margaret River, and then it became shorter and shorter, and then it became longer.
So we're about halfway. Okay, so next slide, please. So why did we do this? Bernadette and I were walking along on a Sunday, and somehow we got to decide, we got to talking about it'd be nice to walk in WA, and Bernadette said, you know, she'd seen, I think this is how it went. We both blame each other. That, you know, she'd like to do the Cape to Cape track. And I said, well, I've never done it and I'd really like to do it too. So somehow from that it went to, should we do it as a base camp? So then, okay, well, is anybody going to be interested in going to do it? So what we did was have some informal chats with the people on the walk. You know, would you be interested in going to WA and walking the Cape to Cape? Oh, yes. Oh, count us in. We put our foot in it now. So we had, I suppose, then we did a bit of background work. I'd spent some time in the southwest. Most years I'd spent in a holiday down there. So I was very familiar with the region. I hadn't walked the track, but I did have some local knowledge. And Bernadette offered to partner in organising the base camp. There was a lot involved because we had to get the people to WA. We had to organise accommodation and transport, whereas in Tasmania was relatively easy because at least we took our cars across and could drive around when we got there. We put out a bit further along the process, we put out an expression of interest on the website, which was basically asking Kitty to create an event, and people could express their interest so that we could gauge whether there was going to be enough interest to warrant us formalising the base camp. Later on in the process, when we knew numbers, we made that into an actual event by accepting the first group of people and putting the rest of the people on the waiting list. So I think over 30 people registered their interest. So we were definitely committed at that point. Part of organising a base camp is making sure that the base camp coordinator, which is Julie Bertison, knows about what you're planning to do, and it goes to the committee. Now, the reason for that isn't because you're going to have a committee coming down and saying, no, you can't do that. It's to prevent clashes with things that are being organised. So there might be some movement in the dates. We don't want, people spending lots of time organising a base camp only to find somebody else is organising a base camp for the same dates, or, there's some other significant thing. So that's just a pointer there. Okay. I'm going to hand over to Bernadette now to talk about how we found out about what we're going to be doing.
Thanks, Cheryl. Move your stuff, Cheryl. Okay, so before I did this base camp, I've led 2 walks for the club. So this was a huge leap for me.
She's trebled it, quadrupled it.
So I thought I'm going to be responsible for a lot of people in the club, their safety, getting to know the path, etc., etc. Where am I going to start? And whenever I go to an Australian country town, one of the things I love to do is to go to a tourist bureau. So that's what I did. I just rang the Margaret River Tourist Bureau and I started talking and asking questions. And the first woman I spoke to, so I said, we're a group of people, we want to do the Cape to Cape. And she goes, stop right there. There is a website that's going to give you all the information that you need. It's called the Cape to Cape, Friends of the Cape to Cape track. Everyone will be able to source that now and get lots of information. So, what was on that website was information about the track, talked about this book here. It talked about this map, and this map is fantastic. So, you have a look. I'm just going to point out one thing on this map. Okay, so can everyone see that there's a green marking there and then yellow here. So immediately what that told us was that there was 6 or 7 kilometres of sand walking here. So that sort of information was valuable, really valuable for us. So a good snapshot. The Tourist Bureau also handed out these. I had to sort of bribe them to get them to send more than 5. So the book, the maps, they told us there's a Facebook, a Friends of the Cape to Cape Facebook, and that was valuable for on-the-spot information about conditions of the track. That same website talked about the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions, and what I didn't find them very helpful, that site, that government site, except Sheryl did find shortly before we left where they had updated on that site the works that they were doing on different parts of the track. That was very helpful because this book was written in 2022 or something, whereas this was, that government website had information about improvements to different parts of the track. So that was really great. So then I was able to go back to these people who'd written this book, the Friends of the Cape to Cape track, and asked them sometimes, I asked this woman specific questions about one spot where we wanted the bus to come and pick us up. And I said, will that bus be able to get in there? Because I'm not quite understanding what the bus driver's saying. And she explained that it would. So that was really fantastic. And this woman, Jane Scott, she's written heaps and heaps and heaps of books about that area and fungi and things like that. So she was very generous with her information. So that website also led us to the bus driver, which was fantastic. Eventually we got there, not straight away, but so the Tourist Bureau was a great place for us to start, in my opinion. The other bit of information that we got was the app for the track, and I think that came from, sorry?
Do you want the next slide?
Oh, okay. So I think that information came from Brett's relative about that app. So that's an app on your phone, and it literally showed us while we were walking where we were on the track and showed us how far we were from the next major spot or how far we'd walked and what were the points of interest along the way. So I found that really helpful because we were 3,500 miles away from that track. There's no way we could do a look over. So the app was fantastic. I think that's, so yes, that there is the map, that's the book, and that's the app. Okay, and in this book, it told us things like phone coverage and that sort of thing. It pointed out what the Cape to Cape track sign was, the post that you would see along the way. So that was very helpful. The other thing that was really helpful was the local expertise that we were able to source just by ringing people and asking different questions. So one of those questions was, we weren't sure, I mean, we ended up in Margaret River, but we had heard stories about different people getting accommodation at different spots along the way. But then after we'd spoken to bus drivers and tour operators, we realised actually we can base in Margaret River and get a bus to take us to each spot. So that was really great because one spot to stay in is so much easier to organise than a few along the way. So a lot of that was from the Tourist Bureau, and then all the information that came out of that and all the agencies that came out of that spot. We also got, even though we didn't use tour operators, we got a lot of information off their sites, like their advice about walking on sand and different things like that. So we sort of gleaned a lot from their information, and people were asking about walking shoes, what should we do? We got a lot of information from those sites, even though we didn't use those tour operators. Is that it?
Next slide.
Okay.
That's you.
Is it?
You're going to do the first part.
Oh, that's right.
I can do it if you like, but
Studying the track. So what walking companies were offering? We started by examining how commercial companies broke up the track into a series of walks, day walks. These generally do the track in 7 days, with daily walks ranging from 14 to 26, with an average of 20 kilometres a day. Then we thought, well, how long can we walk a day? So the track is a grade 4 out of 5. So the track is graded moderate to challenging due to its rough, sandy and steep sections requiring good fitness and bushwalking experience. The track often features long, difficult stretches with rocky terrain, though it does offer suitable sections for beginners. So, for instance, the Friends of the Earth Cape to Cape people, they offer sections on Sundays for anyone to go with them. There are 2 sections that included the 5 to 7 kilometre beaches that you can see on this map quite clearly. We decided that if at all possible, we should limit walks to 20 kilometres a day. Factors in reducing the length of the walk of the day were the bus access. So, bus access. So, let's have a look at, this is the very bottom. This is Cape Lewin. On the second last day, we walked along this stretch here. No, along this stretch here, which was mostly sand. Now, if something had happened on that, it meant clambering over this, which we didn't know anything about. You know, what is it? Is it sand? Is it, are there any parts? We didn't know anything about that. So the only way to get out was just to keep going.
perhaps we should say that, and I should have pointed out on the map at the beginning, the road doesn't run along the coast. The road runs inland from the coast quite some way. And then there are a series of roads that go to the coast. Most of them are 4-wheel drive going to fishing spots. So it's just a very rough, sandy track with big holes that goes to a spot where the fishermen go to catch the fish. There were about 4 points where, well, I suppose there was one each day, where a 2-wheel drive could get in. And there was very few days, I think 2 days, where there was actually a means in partway through the walk. So once you're committed to the day, you're committed to the day.
So yes, factors in reducing the length of days was the bus access points. So the trail traverses the entire length of the Cape Naturalist at the top to Cape Lewin at the bottom. And it largely follows the coast, but it does go inland sometimes. It passes by 4 very small settlements, only one, a caravan park with a shop. There are a number of sandy tracks that lead to coastal fishing spots that are accessible by 4-wheel drive vehicles only. Access to the track by bus limited our ability to tailor the walk. Yes.
Question around, did you use Google?
Were you using Google Earth? Would that show the terrain? Google Earth, like to
Google
understand-
Earth.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. Was
Yeah.
it accurate?
We went on and watched lots of videos of people doing the track, and these people had, some of them had, like, you know, walking along, but no matter how many videos I watched, no matter how many blogs I read, I still didn't feel like I knew.
I had a much better idea because I knew what the area was like. I knew what the terrain was largely like, but that didn't mean from kilometre to kilometre I knew what it was going to be like. But I knew the types of terrain and and what it meant when it said it was sandy. But that was very hard for Bernadette to get her head around descriptions like that because she had no context for it. But the book is very good in saying,
You
You know,
come to a staircase, there
yeah,
are rocks, but
and it's got lots of photos, and it will say, this is what it looks like now, but this beach is subject to dramatic change depending on how much has been washed away. So don't rely on this photo, but it was very good at pointing that out, which landmarks you might see and which landmarks might be gone. But the app, as Bernadette said, was excellent when we're actually on the track.
So
Yeah.
you had coverage, internet coverage?
No,
no, but the app
used
didn't
as satellite.
You don't know the immediate conditions. What else?
the app didn't need what's
Yeah,
it
yeah.
called?
Mobile phone coverage.
Yeah, it didn't need phone coverage to know where you were. So that was another good point about the app. Right. So yeah, so access to the track by the bus was limited, and it limited our ability to tailor the walk, and also meant that on many days, once you started the walk, you were committed to the day. And as I said, I and Sheryl watched lots of videos, read blogs, but the hardest thing for me, like Sheryl said, was that I wasn't able to do a look over. And I know that's the way I learn, by actually doing something, and I couldn't. Okay.
So the walk plan. We decided to walk over 8 days. We looked at the best time of the year to do the walk. Eliminated summer because it's too hot. Eliminated winter because it's too wet and cold. Spring and autumn are the best times. Spring, you get the lovely wildflowers and the whales going past, but unfortunately that conflicted with a number of other club activities that were going to be on. So we went for autumn, which was also going to be a lovely time of year, but not with those attractions. We opted to go from north to south for a number of reasons. The first section of the walk is the easiest section. In fact, the first day, the section until morning tea was on boardwalks. And the reason we wanted to do the easier section early was to get people's fitness up. I mean, we did have concerns that some people mightn't have had a realistic idea of what the track was going to be like, or perhaps they didn't know their actual level of fitness. They did. And I mean, that proved true. You know, people got fitter and fitter as they went and coped better and better the further along the track they went, even though it was getting harder and harder. So that was a great strategy. It also, going from the north to the south, also meant that you weren't walking into the sun. So you could enjoy the vistas much better. It also meant that most of the time we had the wind at our back. So that was why we went in the direction we did. The last day on the usual walk that the commercial operators offer is 27 or 28 kilometres with 6 kilometres of beach walking. We decided, and it's notorious. It's notorious for being soft sand, and the complaints on, you know, the websites and, you know, is all about how hard and how much of a slog it is. So we decided that we wanted to split that into two. The only way we could do that was there was a 4-wheel drive track that came down to the beach after the long sandy section, but it meant that we had 1.5 kilometres of hiking over these sand dunes up to where there was a road that the bus could get to pick us up. So sand dunes like that, yes. Yes. Sand dunes like that. And then the next day the bus would drop us off at the road and we would walk down the 1.5 kilometres to the beach and continue on for the last section. So that was our plan. It was better to add in the 3 kilometres than to try and do 28 kilometres through. Now, we were actually very lucky because the sand wasn't as soft as it usually is. But also, once we're in Margaret River, the bus drivers advised us to do the second last day in reverse. So the second last and the last day, we came in by bus to that road, and then both days we walked down the 1.5 kilometres to the beach rather than having to climb one of those days, 1.5. So the second last day, we went down to the beach and went northwards to where we'd finished the previous day. And then the last day, we went back to the same point and we walked to the end of the walk to the lighthouse.
So that's the beauty of the local knowledge.
Yes.
Yes, very much so.
Okay. I think that's okay. So then, next slide. So that was the walking part of it. Then we had to think about what sort of base camp did we want it to be. Okay, 132 kilometres of walking. Is that really what we wanted to offer people? Were we going to get our group to the end if every day we're going to be slogging along on the sand? We wanted it to be enjoyable. We wanted people to have time to look around, take in the view, take in photos and appreciate what they were experiencing rather than being laden down with blisters and sore feet and weariness. So we decided to make it into bite-sized chunks. We would walk 2 days, have a day off, a day of recovery, walk 2 days, have a day off. And we did that. So the 8 days we spread out by having recovery days, which were our sightseeing days. We were going to be in the southwest of Western Australia, a famous tourist area. We didn't want people to be flying into Busselton, Margaret River, walking and then flying back, and it could have been a beautiful coast anywhere in the country. We wanted them to experience the region as well. So we devised a range of activities on those rest days. We also had to consider the flights. We were really lucky that there are direct flights from Melbourne to Busselton 3 times a week. It was an affordable option with Jetstar. And then the bus picked us up from Busselton and took us down to Margaret River. But we also needed to factor in the fact that there weren't flights out every day. So what it meant is at the end, we actually had 2 days sightseeing, and then we had the bus trip back to Busselton to fly out. So it resulted in a 15-day base camp from the 30th of April to the 14th of May. So it was pretty lengthy. There was a lot. Okay, I think it's next slide, and it's Bernadette.
All right. Well, no.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so we split up the tasks, and some of these tasks came to us as we started talking. We didn't know them all up front. So there was those 8 days of walking. So Cheryl took 4 days of the track and I took 4 days of the track. And we've heard about my struggle with that. So we had to learn about the sand walking, the elevation, whether it was shady or not, were there any trick turns, whether there were water diversions. Okay, so Margaret River runs into the sea. We needed to know whether we had to divert before we got there, and we had to figure that out. We divided up the excursion days. There were group dinners, special events like Mother's Day and Helen's birthday. So all that was shared around. And as tasks came up, we sort of split them up. I was in charge of transport and accommodation, and Cheryl took on communicating with the participants. Thank you, Cheryl. So Cheryl was sending out all the emails, dealing with the website, sending out the survey monkeys, which happened twice. And Cheryl also took a big interest in the history of the area and did a lot of research for that and the Indigenous part of that. Finances came into that too. So there's a lot of communicating about that. So now we're on to accommodation. Oh, here we are. Peppermint cottages.
Excellent.
Excellent, yes. So how did I find peppermint cottages? The Tourist Bureau. They were fantastic. So they sent a whole list of things and I just went through them and thought, what am I looking for? I'm looking for something like we had in Tasmania. So because I hadn't been on, a lot of base camps, because I hadn't led them, I just sort of thought, well, what do I like? I liked Tasmania, the way we were all sort of in a bit of a circle, mostly in the same area. There was one communal area. So I thought that's sort of what I had in the back of my mind about what I wanted. And luckily I found this place, and the things that were good about that, critical factors were that it was reasonably priced. It had about 8 cottages. So by this time, we thought we could divide people up into those cottages quite easily. They were really easy to deal with, these people. Any questions I had, they would answer them really quickly. So I opted for something like this rather than apartments or units or caravan parks, because this just seemed just sort of hit the mark in a few spots. It was close to town, could fit all of us. It had good reviews. We wanted to share cottages so that that would bring the costs down. We could do that. There were cooking facilities in the cottages. You could even cook on the fire pit at the front of each cottage. There was 2 bedrooms in each cottage. And when we spoke to the owner and said, you know, we've got approximate numbers at the moment, this was, I mean, we started doing this a year before we left. So we didn't know exactly numbers or dates. So anyway, he wanted a $1,000 deposit. That was fine. And then he locked in some dates for us while we sort of got surveys going. We ended up paying him $17,500 for accommodation. So, and we paid.
So that was 15 days for 19 people. Mm.
And everyone, I didn't hear any complaints about the cottages. They serviced the cottages twice while we were there.
3 times.
3 times. Yeah.
3 times.
Oh, 3 times.
Every
Oh, there you
other
go.
day.
There was a laundry, which you could just use your credit card on to,
Yeah.
which was fantastic. Beautiful, you know, lawn area, which we could have the barbecues going in. So, and the weather was fantastic. So we could get out there and have our gatherings in the circular bit, and people could sit on their verandas and have a glass of wine. And yeah, so that worked really well.
Next.
Okay. Next one. Oh, the bus. So this is actually where we ended up. Remember how Sheryl was talking about that road where we went down and then left, down and then right? That was, I gave the bus driver the 3 words for that spot. He'd never heard of what 3 words. Anyway, so as I said, we weren't sure if we were going to be staying in one spot, but when we did decide that, then it was a matter of finding the bus driver to do it. And again, I went to the Friends of the Cape to Cape track website, and there's a section on transport, and they had about 5 different companies. And the first one that I spoke to wanted to do the whole trip for us, accommodation, everything. And I said, no, we don't want that. We just want a driver. The next guy said at this stage, you know, we weren't sure about numbers, and he was saying, yes, that'd be fine. He was good with the dates. And then a couple of weeks later, he emailed and said, sorry, I can't do it. The group's too big, but I know somebody else. So we ended up getting this guy, Jai, with his 20-seater bus. So that then determined how many people we could have on the base camp. And then we told him what we wanted, you know, the 8 days of walking, plus the excursions, plus the airport pickup, and he gave us the price, and we moved from there. And he said, again, we paid him, what did we pay him? We paid him just over $9,000, and he said that went to paying his GST bill.
He gave us a reduced rate, so we'd win the job because he had this GST bill that needed paying. Apparently the previous year, so he had a couple of buses, a tree branch or a tree fell on one of the buses, and that had made obviously a big impact on his cash flow, plus the amount that he was out from the insurance payout. So he was after some income, guaranteed income for us, you know. So he gave us a good rate.
I think that's it for me.
Yeah. Okay. It's probably up to me again. Okay. I mentioned earlier about our free days. Margaret River is a premium wine growing region. There's also a number of breweries and distilleries. It's known for its local produce. It's fresh and varied from olive oil to cheese to chocolate. We enjoyed them all. As well as the beautiful coastline. There are a number of natural wonders away from the coast, including limestone caves and the forests, and cultural activities. Lots of hippies moved down there for the surfing during the 1960s and 70s. And out of that has grown quite arts and craft and handicraft sort of activities. So we wanted to make sure that there was a range of activities on offer. Obviously, people weren't going to like all of the activities, but we wanted to make sure there was enough there for everybody to think that they'd enjoyed something. As Bernadette said, we shared responsibility for allocating days. We decided that we would organise the activities in parallel to the days that we walked. So the activities we would start in the north and do different activities as we sort of move through the region. We started off ignoring the first day. So perhaps I should mention the first day. So we flew into Busselton. Considered the fact that people were going to be on the plane for 3.5, 4 hours or whatever it was, plus a few hours getting to the airport. They'd be ready for a break once they got to Busselton. So we arranged for the bus to pick us up at the airport to take us into town because it's a bit out of town. It's known as the Busselton Margaret River Airport, and a number of people thought they were actually flying into Margaret River, but it is actually 3/4 of an hour from Margaret River. So it's not close to Margaret River. So we went into town. The bus driver bought a second bus for the luggage, and they took the luggage back to Margaret River to our accommodation and took us into town. We enjoyed the historic jetty there. It's the longest timber jetty in the Southern Hemisphere. There was great underwater observatories and people had a chance to eat or walk along the jetty or go to the observatory. So a couple of hours free time to stretch your legs and enjoy Busselton. Then the bus took us to Margaret River. Another thing we had to consider was that we were having the usual get together that night briefing with a barbecue. People needed to have an opportunity to get food. So the bus driver took us through the town, pointing out, here's this supermarket, and here's this supermarket, and this is where it is in relation to your accommodation. It was all easy walking. Drop people off so you could buy the food that we needed for the next couple of days walking, plus food for that night. So that was a flavour of the first day. Then we walked for 2 days. Then we had a day off and we started with an Aboriginal experience in the Nulgee Caves. It was fantastic. Here he's demonstrating fire making, and that is the stem of the grass tree, I think he's using.
That's the one that grows up.
Yes. So he gave us lots of great information and then took us down into the cave and played the didgeridoo, which was also an amazing experience.
You say you shared the responsibilities. Was that just between the two
Yes.
of you, or did you allocate tasks to?
Not at
Not
this
for
stage.
this
In the
stage.
planning, we did all the planning. Okay, some of the walk days we ended with an extra activity. So the first day we ended at the Historic Caves House, which for a much enjoyed glass of wine and relax. Other days we had a cafe lunch in Prevelly after a half day walk. The end of the walk, we ended at the lighthouse with time to walk around the site and visit the museum and enjoy that. We had to consider meals. As usual, first night briefing with barbecue dinner, which has become usual. A final dinner at a local pub, which was just down the road. But then we had to consider, okay, what were we doing for the other days? So the sightseeing days often involved a lunch out. So there we went to Goanna Bush Cafe one day, the Quarramup Brewing Company another day. We had a picnic lunch in Nannup on a third day. So those days we decided, well, we didn't need dinner to worry about dinner. So dinner would be do it yourself. So people could have something in their cottages. They could wander down the street and buy something. They could eat or not. It suited themselves. We looked at the length of the walk days, and that also influenced whether we organised activities, a meal for that night. We had another night out at a brewery in town. We also had 2 group barbecues apart from the first one. So we celebrated Mother's Day with a group barbecue, and we had entertainment organised by Iris, which was great fun. Okay. Page. Okay. So the limited ability to opt out, because the bus was going to be taking us on a sightseeing day, for example, almost back to the start where we started our walk for activities up there, then you either had to opt in for the whole day or out for the whole day. So that was made clear to the participants. There was one day where we were doing activities closer to Margaret River, and we offered activities in the morning and lunch, and then a winery in the afternoon, but the bus took people that wanted to go to the winery and then drove the rest of the people back to the accommodation and then came back to pick up the people from the winery. So that day was an opportunity to opt out for half a day. It seemed to work well. I think communication was the key there in making, in people understanding what was on the cards. It also affected, obviously, how much they paid. The other thing I wanted to do was, and this was my personal preference there, I wanted people to have a better understanding of the region and what we're experiencing there. So I researched various aspects, and each day I provided a brief overview of a topic on the bus. So we started with Aboriginal inhabitants and history in the region, white settlement, geography, the caves, the track, wineries, surfing, agriculture, lighthouses, and so it went on. I mean, there were 15 days. So it was about 5-10 minutes on the bus. What we also wanted to do was to make sure that at the start of each day's walk, we got onto the track as quickly as we could. We didn't want to be spending, 3/4 of an hour on the bus, getting off the bus, having a circle, briefing people going off to the toilet, and then half an hour after we'd arrived, actually walking. So we did our head count getting onto the bus, make sure we took everybody. After that, we didn't worry too much. And we used the time on the bus to tell people about what was going to be happening. We also, at the end of the day, told people on the bus about what was going to happen the following day. So what the walk would be like, what they should bring, whether there were going to be any stream crossings, how much beach walking there was going to be, sometimes what the weather might have been like. So people were prepared, whether they needed to bring morning tea and lunch and afternoon tea and extra supplies. So that sort of information we gave on the bus at the end of the day. And we gave a summary on the way to the walk in the morning as well, the sort of thing you would do in your circle. So the disadvantage of that was that there was no microphone on the bus, so it wasn't necessarily easy to hear for everybody, but it was a good use of the time that was available. Otherwise, you were wasting that travelling time. And after the first couple of days, I asked participants whether they wanted to continue with the information on the bus, and overwhelmingly they said yes, they were finding it valuable. So despite there possibly being, background noise and some hard to hear, it seemed to have been well received. Okay, Bernadette's going to talk about some particular activities. You've got your own.
Activity,
You wanted
am
to-
I?
Yeah, you
I
remember you wanted to talk about
right. Okay, how, what's the name of that one?
Edwards.
Edwards Wines. This is a plug for Edwards Wines. So, so we divided up the excursions, and I remember ringing a few different wineries, Vax Felix, is that the name of that place?
That's Felix, yes.
And so some really nice ones and some mediocre ones and middle, and I don't know a lot about them anyway, but this place here, Edwards Winery, which was only like 10 minutes out of Margaret River, they were fantastic because they were very open about what we wanted. So that's what I found with dealing with some of these places, that the easier they were to talk to, the more I wanted to be, investigate more. Some of the posh wineries just said it's $50 for you to come in for 1 hour and do a tour, and then you come and buy our wines. And there was no discussion about anything. You just had to accept their price. Whereas the people here gave us $50 worth of an experience. So we arrived, she took us to their art gallery. Then she handed us over to her husband, who talked about the vines, with the vines, and he's picking the vines and showing us, and it was amazing. Then we came back into this beautiful room, and she set us up with the chocolate and the wine, and I had to, there were lots of emails going backwards and forwards about, can you just have chocolate? Because some people didn't want to drink. Yes, you can just have can you just have wine? Yes, you can. Can you just come along and, yes, you can just come along and not do any of it. And so that was really, really good that she was like that. And it was worth $50, but I didn't pay a thing because so many other people were buying wines that I didn't have to pay the $15 corkage that they usually charge. So my little, what's the word called?
Plug? Plug?
Plug for Edwards Wines.
Just,
Question.
Hmm?
Was the wine any good?
Oh,
it was beautiful.
I felt like I was in heaven. I felt it was the best experience I've ever had at a winery.
Yeah. No, it was great. And these chocolates, they had gone to the chocolatier with their bottle of with their wine and said, can you create a chocolate that matches this wine? So they were magnificent as well. Okay, just as a brief summary, the picture at the top is Quarramup, which is a little town along the road, so not along the coast, and they've made the most of their name. So Quarramup is spelled C-O-W-A-R, so cow. So it's all these cows around the town. Quar, that's cowy. This was the visit to the cheese place.
Again, very hospitable people.
Yes, and that was great. And they had Clydesdale horses. This is from the cave at the beginning, the magnificent formations in the cave. And the top picture on the right-hand side is from our boat cruise at the end. So we finished in Augusta, and the following day we had a boat cruise along the estuary. And he was incredible at picking out the birds and the wildlife. And then there were all these pods of dolphins that came around. That was also a great experience. Okay, next one, finances.
Cheryl,
Yes. Oh, the time.
the time.
Okay. So we decided that everybody would be responsible for organising and paying for their own flights, getting themselves there. We had to decide how to allocate the accommodation costs. Each cottage had 2 bedrooms, and there were either 1 or 2 people sharing a bedroom. So we decided the fairest thing to do was to say half the cost of the cottage per bedroom. And if there were 2 people in 1 bedroom, then they paid a quarter. If there was 1 person in the bedroom, they paid half the cost. We decided that was the fairest, and that's how we charged. Many of the optional activities had to be prepaid. So we asked people what they wanted to do and then charged them accordingly. We decided with the bus that everyone would pay an equal share whether or not they were using it on a particular day. So if they decided not to go on sightseeing day or not to walk on the day, they would still contribute to the cost of that was basically a sunk cost. So we were upfront all the way along the line with the ways that we would be charging participants. We provided a preliminary budget when people expressed their interest, so they knew about how much they might be liable for, so they could make an informed decision on whether they had the financial ability to participate. We fine-tuned that budget as we booked activities, and it came to less than what we had forecast, so that was great. The amount that people paid did vary considerably on the basis of the accommodation and what activities they'd chosen to do. We had to make some payments well in advance. The accommodation particularly was due in 3 instalments. So we asked people to make an initial deposit as soon as we changed it from expressions of interest to you're the first 20 on the list and there's 20 spots. That, I think it was $50 with the initial payment. As well as them showing us that they were serious about coming, we'd had to pay that $1,000 initial payment for the accommodation. We'd basically paid that ourselves. Now, one of the things that came out of this was the establishment of a special events bank account. Previous base camps, the leaders collected the money and managed it themselves, so it went into their personal account. Certainly for Tasmania, I didn't feel comfortable with that. There was a lack of transparency, and I was the one that was responsible, and I didn't feel comfortable. So I don't know what the people that were paying in felt. So the committee talked about it and decided that it would be better if the club had an account, a dedicated account for special events of this type. So where a a leader, whether it was what sort of activity, was collecting money that was going to be paid out to a third party. So we established the account, thanks to Gary, who has been monitoring that and reconciling it along the way. So it's been a bit more work for him, but it's certainly been much better as a management tool and for auditing purposes. Okay, next. Surveys. Okay, basically we need to give people information and collect information from them. There were 3 surveys. The first, we provided a draft itinerary. We were still trying to make sure that people understood what they were putting themselves in for. So we asked them whether they had read and understood the itinerary. You know, have you read that there are 7 kilometres of beaches walking on this day? But
You still don't know until you get there.
no, but we tried.
No, they didn't.
No. But some people got to that question and then they didn't go further in the survey for some time while they went away and read the itinerary and came back a couple of days later. And I was very aware of the incomplete surveys at that point until they moved on. Okay, we also asked in that survey about who they wanted to share with, if they had any preferences. We used that to determine how many cottages we needed. Initially, we booked 8 and then reduced it to 6 because people were happy to be 2 in a room and 4 in a cottage. We also asked about arrival and departure plans because we needed to know how many people were arriving at the Busselton airport, for example, and needed transporting. Janet actually drove herself across the Nullarbor. Very commendable. 19 people came on the plane together at the start of the base camp, but quite a few stayed on afterwards. So fewer went back immediately. We also asked people to make a commitment about the finance at that point. Okay, the second survey was about sightseeing, giving them more information about bus and accommodation costs, and asking them, giving the detail of the sightseeing that we're going to do and asking them whether or not they wanted to do those activities. That enabled us to book those activities with firm numbers. Okay, the third survey, we're going to have another slide on that. So then that comes back to Dave's question about seeking offers of assistance. When we first, you can move on to the next one, said we're going to thinking of running the camp, Tony McIlvaney and Chris Smith said they were very quick to offer their help in leading walks. And then as we progressed, there's a picture of the group at the end, we decided that we would open it up to the whole group to see who else would like to help and in what way. So we prepared a list of possible tasks. So they ranged from being a leader, being a whip, to monitoring the conditions of the track through the Facebook pages, seeing whether there are any warnings about fires or flood or what the condition of the river was going to be, to looking after the personal locator beacon, to overseeing the barbecues, entertainment. There were lots of different tasks. We also asked people whether they had a special interest on a topic and therefore would want to talk about that at a particular, at the relevant location on the walk. The response was fantastic. Nearly every single person volunteered to assist in some way. Bernadette's going to talk more about the first aid in a moment, but it was fantastic from Bernadette and my point of view because it made the experience for us so much more enjoyable. It meant that initially we thought that we were going to be either the leader or the whip every single day. And then Tony and Chris said it's okay, we're going to have a day that we wouldn't have to lead. But then so many people came forward with offers of help that, the long days we were able to have a leader in the morning and a leader in the afternoon. So, and we didn't manage to make all the days less than 20, by the way. There were a couple that were more than that. But I think as well as helping us, it gave the participants a buy-in to the success of the base camp. And I think they, achieved that admirably. So thank you to all the people that are listening that were part of that teamwork. Okay, Bernadette.
First aid. All right. Okay. So another thing I'd never done for the club was very much to do with first aid, except for that training that we did. That's all I know about first aid. So I was a bit concerned about, again, 20 people and being responsible for them. So I said to Sheryl, can we get volunteers? Maybe people put up their hand. And luckily, 3 nurses, Helen, Carmel and Marie, put up their hand for first aid. And I have to say that I didn't actually think about it after that because I felt like a load had been lifted and they were going to take care of everything, which I was really happy about. So they worked together in Melbourne before they left to sort out who was going to be the primary first aider, and that became Helen. And then Carmel looked at supplies and getting the appropriate supplies and then making sure that enough people were carrying those supplies. We also told people in our communications that they needed to have their emergency slip up to date, and also what was the other thing that we told them to do? I can't remember, it's lost. And carry a first aid, that's right. That's exactly what we told them to do. So I was very happy about that, and I think we drew on people's strengths, which is something that I think is good within the club. Rather than asking me to do something that I don't feel confident about, draw on people's strengths and what they're good at and what they feel comfortable doing. So as I said, I didn't really think about it after that because it was all taken care of. So if something happened in the walk, Carmel told me that, say if someone had a sore foot, they would go to Helen and say, we've looked at the sore foot, it seems a bit, red, what do you think? And, they would decide together. And Carmel said to me, what was the expression that you used, Carmel, that you said to me? The way nurses work is that they work in teams. So that's the way they worked in Western Australia. So they would ask the leader, Helen, and then discuss it together, and then Helen was the person who then made the decision about what to do. And we also stressed to everyone, if they were walking, so this is on the first night, to be really aware of how they were going and to say immediately if something didn't feel right in their foot or wherever, so that it could be dealt with straight away, because we didn't want to lose anyone for the rest of the walk. you know, for the rest of the few days. We wanted everyone to be on the walk as much as possible. And we told them, you know, we have 3 first aiders here that you can take advantage of. So we basically had no major incidents except for one. But which, I mean, you can't really, I mean, that was pretty good though, really. But it was dealt with in a way that we,
It wasn't a major, we had an injury,
yeah,
which required an evacuation. But
it did, because there was no way out, that person had to hobble to the nearest spot. But it didn't stop everyone else from continuing on. So that worked really well.
I think of another first aid slide.
Excuse me. Oh, I just wanted to point out, these shoes here were from Kathmandu for going across wet rocks and things like that. So we tried to explain to people beforehand to think about those sort of things, to bring those sort of things along. You can see we asked people to try and walk on sand before they went, to experience that feeling of sinking into the sand and then coming out of it, which I didn't know takes a lot of effort. So we asked people to come on my walk from Parkdale to experience that.
Sand, but
Sorry?
very different sand. WA sand is very fine and soft. Parkdale was just hard sand.
Yeah.
Part of down towards where the water was up.
So what was your question, Stephen?
What, normally if you go on sand, you don't go up the top, you go right next to where the water is because it can take it.
Yeah.
It didn't there.
It wasn't necessarily firm near the water.
No.
It depended on whether the tide was coming in or going out.
Yeah.
And also sometimes there were limestone shelves along. So we walked on the best part that we could.
Yeah. Some people took off their shoe and walked in the water. The other thing we did we also had Alan carrying the personal locator beacon. So Cheryl didn't have to carry it, I didn't have to carry it. So again, that's where people took on responsibility. We asked the club secretary at the time, Carol, about our insurance, and apparently our insurance covers bushwalking, swimming, caving, social activities and club meetings, and rock scurrying, among other things. So that was reassuring. We had, again, to minimise the risks, we had Gillian, as Sheryl said, checking on the Facebook page about river crossings. So that was her responsibility again. So what else? Okay, next. Finally. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention, we also had the Emergency Plus app, which is nationwide. Okay, so how did it all work in practice? Lessons learned, Helen's birthday. So for me, when I thought about giving this presentation, I had to go back through my emails because I'd forgotten a lot of it. Anyway, so I set up my things in my emails with folders. Okay, so I've got Western Australian Base Camp folder, and under that are subfolders. I had 23 subfolders. And then I thought, I wonder how many emails are in those. So I started counting, went into each subfolder. And when I got halfway down the list of my folders, there were 450 emails that I'd counted, and I was only halfway through. So I think for me, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst is what we did. It's my point about that. And the fact that everyone volunteered to do something, they felt that they were participating, I think that helped it become a successful base camp. I've been able to pass on information about Margaret River and the Cape to Cape to another bushwalking club, Streslecki Bushwalking Club, and they were very grateful because that saved them from 450 emails. And it was lovely to celebrate Helen's birthday while we were there.
The photo down the bottom is the lighthouse at the end. So that's coming along that probably the second last day or the beginning of the last day, and that's what you see in the distance. Okay, that's the end of our presentation. You want to put the people back on the screen, please? Yeah, they are still there. Okay, so first of all, from the people in Canberra, anybody got any questions or comments they'd like to make? You need to come off mute.
Questions, anybody? Anybody?
No questions.
No questions? No questions here.
Okay,
What did she
what
say?
about
Nothing?
what about in the room? Yes, Dave.
Did you have to provide equipment lists to the participants?
We did. We got in the first survey, there was a section at the end where people could put in general comments. I got lots of questions in there, wanting more detail about various things, particularly, what shoes they should take or what. So that generated a lot of research on our part and providing advice back on what they're like to experience and what they should take. Yes, and we provided a list of recommended, things like insect nets and,
And
these gaiters.
They saved you getting sand in your.
They were excellent. Oh, they were fantastic. If anybody
at Bunnings.
Anybody, so they're gardeners' gaiters. They just material and they stop the sand getting in your shoes. If on bushwalks, even if you've got tracks with stones, I would really recommend them. They were saved all of that tipping the sand out of your shoes all the time or rubbing on your feet. So really great. Any other questions?
You mentioned that you asked for support while you were at the camp and you had started your walk. Would it have made any difference to your planning had you asked beforehand?
Perhaps I wasn't very clear. The third survey that we put out asked people.
Yes, it was at the beginning.
It was before the base camp, and what we did after we got the responses and allocated. So we got all these responses and we allocated tasks to people because people were very good at offering. Then Bernadette or I contacted them and work through what we intended and how it might work with the people that were leaders and whips. We gave them copies of the maps and the materials that we had and worked with them on what their walk plans would be like. So so all of that was done beforehand. It was a good question.
Bernadette, you mentioned you had to bribe the tourist office to send you more than 5 maps. Could you give us a bit more detail about that?
What is that map?
I think I've still had one.
How does that map they sent you different than the other map?
That's the Friends of the Cape to Cape. So it's quite detailed with the track, whereas this is basically just the region. You can have that if you like.
It's a really good little map.
You can have it.
You can have it.
That wasn't a serious question, was it?
No.
I was just curious as to what you would use to bribe.
No. I was sort of, I was just joking. They didn't want to give out many. They ended up giving me 10 in the mail before we got there.
I think we picked them up at the airport.
And you could also pick them up at the airport.
Yeah, there was on
yes.
the airport, so I
Yeah.
picked one up.
Pardon?
What advice have you got to give us about walking in soft sand, given your experience?
What advice have we got about walking in soft sand, giving our experience?
Avoid it.
Um,
A serious question.
yeah, okay. I think,
I used those sandals, you know, you told me to buy
yes.
sandals, and I ended up by wearing them for generally walking. Oh,
Sorry.
Sorry, yeah, one of the things Cheryl told me before I went was to buy, I forget what the brand is now, but there's a good brand of sandals you buy from the bushwalking shops. And that helped me a lot. Even just normal walking, never mind on sand.
I think doing preparation, so doing some walk in soft sand and on soft surfaces is good preparation. I think knowing as much as possible what you're up for, so that you know that today is going to be 5 kilometres of walking in soft sand. You've been thinking about it for a couple of days. So all you got to do then is get on with it.
One thing that I realised that helped me was if someone was walking in front of me, I stepped into their print, because as I was saying, with sand, you sink down and then you have to pull yourself up. That's why it's so difficult. Whereas someone's already pushed that imprint into the ground, then you're not sinking as far. So that was a little trick.
And the key then was to find somebody whose pace was about the same pace as you. So you walked towards the back of the group and you tried out the different steps until you found one that worked for you.
Yeah.
I was glad to be the whip that day. Any other questions? Any other questions from people have thought of? Okay, just before we go, I want to thank Dave for looking after the technology today, to wish him a happy 65th birthday for tomorrow and thank him for the cake that he's bought tonight. No, also thank you to Carmel and Kitty for catering tonight. Much appreciated. So a reminder that next month is about falls and balance, and things that we can learn from that, including using poles. So it'd be great to see as many people as possible coming along to that. Unfortunately, Bernadette and I are going to be away. Okay, unless anybody's got any questions. So thank you very much to the people that attended remotely, and I'll invite the rest of you to supper. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye, good night. Good night. Here we go.
You know how members get
Yeah.
a chat?
Yeah, I think they should get that as well.
Because you can easily make that.